I still remember the moment I decided to learn English. It wasn't a big or dramatic situation. It was actually very simple. One evening, I was watching a movie with English audio and Spanish subtitles. The actors were speaking so naturally, and their expressions were full of emotion, but I had to keep reading the subtitles to understand the story. At one point, I paused the movie and asked myself, why can't I understand what they're saying without reading? That small question started something inside me. I realized that I didn't want to depend on subtitles forever. I wanted to enjoy movies, songs, conversations, and books in English without needing help. That night, I told myself, I'm going to learn English, no matter how long it takes. Before that moment, I had tried learning English many times, but I always gave up quickly. I thought maybe I wasn't good at languages or that I didn't have the discipline to keep going. But this time felt different. It wasn't just a wish, it was a decision. I felt something stronger inside me, a real motivation. I knew that English could change my life. It could give me better job opportunities, allow me to travel, meet people from other countries, and understand more about the world. I imagined myself speaking fluently, talking to foreigners with confidence, and that vision gave me hope. I wasn't doing this for school or because someone told me to. I was doing it for me. The first step, however, was confusing. I didn't know where to begin. There are thousands of resources online, websites, apps, videos, books. Some people said to start with grammar. Others said to focus on speaking or listening. I spent hours searching and ended up feeling lost. It felt like standing in front of a huge library without knowing which book to read first. Eventually, I told myself to stop thinking too much and just start somewhere. I picked a beginner app that taught common words, greetings, and pronunciation. I committed to using it every day for at least 10 minutes. No excuses. It didn't matter if I was tired or busy. I was going to do it. At the beginning, I didn't understand much. I kept repeating the same words over and over. Hello, good morning, my name is... I recorded my voice and listened to how I sounded. It was strange and funny at first. I knew my pronunciation was bad, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get better. After 1 week, I noticed I could remember more words and say some simple sentences. I started feeling proud of myself. For the first time, I saw that learning English was possible if I stayed consistent. I wasn't fluent yet, but I had taken my first real step, and that was something important. That first week was a turning point for me. It showed me that progress comes from daily action, not from waiting for the perfect moment or the best method. I learned that the most important part was not how much I studied, but how often. Even 10 minutes a day could make a difference. More than anything, I realized that I had the power to change my life by learning something new. That idea gave me strength. I was no longer just dreaming about speaking English. I was doing something about it. And that simple decision, made one quiet night during a movie, was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Chapter 2, Building a Routine. After the excitement of the first week, I realized something very important. Motivation is a good way to start, but routine is the key to continue. Without a plan, my learning would eventually slow down. I didn't want that to happen, so I sat down and asked myself how I could make English part of my everyday life. I decided that I would dedicate a specific time each day to study, just like go to school. Mornings work best for me, so I made a habit of studying after breakfast. I created a simple plan: 10 minutes of vocabulary, 10 minutes of listening, 10 minutes of speaking, and 10 minutes of reading. It wasn't perfect, but it was consistent, and that was what I needed. Listening became my favorite part of the routine. Every morning, I watched a short English video, sometimes a cartoon, sometimes a conversation between native speakers. I listened carefully, trying to catch the words and repeat them. At first, I didn't understand much, but slowly certain sounds and phrases became familiar. I started noticing patterns. Words like "I'm going to," "you should," or "what do you think?" began to make sense. I even repeated the sentences out loud, trying to imitate the pronunciation and rhythm. Listening helped me feel connected to the language, like I was getting closer to real English, not just words on a page. Reading was also very helpful, but I had to start with simple texts. I found short stories written for English learners and printed them out. I read each story aloud, underlining the words I didn't know and writing them in my notebook. Every new word I learned was like a small treasure. I created flashcards and tested myself every evening. Slowly, I built my own vocabulary bank. It felt amazing to understand more and more with each passing week. Some sentences became easier to read, and I no longer needed to look up every single word. It was a slow process, but progress was real. Writing was probably the most surprising part of my routine. At first, I didn't think it would help much. But when I started writing simple sentences about my life, everything changed. I began to notice my grammar mistakes and my limited vocabulary. I challenged myself to write about my day, my dreams, or even my favorite food. Writing forced me to organize my thoughts in English, and that made my understanding deeper. I wrote in a journal every day, just 5 to 10 sentences. With time, I felt more confident forming sentences in my head. It was like building a bridge between what I knew and what I wanted to express. The biggest challenge was speaking. I had no one around me to practice with. My friends and family didn't speak English, and I was too shy to join online groups. So I did something unusual. I spoke to myself. Every day, I stood in front of the mirror and talked about anything: how I felt, what I was doing, or what I planned for the weekend. I made mistakes, but I didn't care. I recorded my voice and listened to my pronunciation. At first, I hated how I sounded, but over time, I started to improve. I wasn't fluent yet, but now I had something powerful, a daily routine that made English part of my life. Chapter 3: Facing Challenges. As weeks passed, I started to face the real struggles of learning a new language. There were days when I didn't feel like studying. I woke up tired or distracted, and the idea of repeating the same words or watching another English video didn't excite me. I began to understand something very real. Motivation fades, but discipline keeps you moving. On those hard days, I reminded myself why I started. I thought about my dream of speaking fluently, watching movies without subtitles, and traveling without fear. Those thoughts gave me energy to keep going, even when I didn't feel like it. One of the biggest difficulties I faced was grammar. At first, I ignored it because I just wanted to understand and speak. But later, I noticed that without grammar, I couldn't build proper sentences. I would say things like, he go work, instead of, he goes to work. These mistakes made me feel embarrassed, especially when I try to talk to others online. I started studying basic grammar rules, verb tenses, articles, prepositions, and it was very confusing. Some rules made no sense. Why was it in the morning but at night? These little things made me question everything. The worst moment came when I joined an English-speaking group chat. I was excited at first, but then people started replying quickly, using expressions I didn't understand. I tried to answer, but I made so many mistakes that someone corrected me in a harsh way. I felt ashamed. I left the chat and didn't touch my English notebook for 3 days. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe English wasn't for me after all. I felt small and discouraged. But deep inside, I still wanted to learn. I couldn't give up on something so important. After a few days, I decided to change how I looked at my mistakes. I realized that every mistake was a lesson. I thought about how children learn to speak. They make a lot of mistakes, but they keep talking anyway. That thought gave me strength. I returned to my routine, but now I added a new rule. I would celebrate my mistakes because they meant I was trying. I even made a list of the most common errors I made, and I practiced correcting them one by one. Over time, I made fewer mistakes and felt more confident when writing or speaking. This chapter of struggle was painful, but necessary. It taught me that learning English isn't only about memorizing words or grammar rules. It's about being brave. It's about standing up after falling and saying, I will keep going. Every time I felt like quitting, I remembered that nobody becomes fluent overnight. It takes time, patience, and heart. And even though I still had a long way to go, I knew something important. I was stronger than I thought. Chapter 4, Real Progress. One morning, something happened that made me smile all day. I was listening to a podcast in English, something I did often, but this time was different. I suddenly realized that I understood almost everything. I didn't need to pause every 10 seconds or look for translations. The words enter my ears and reach my brain naturally. It was a magical feeling. I was finally beginning to understand real English. I felt proud, excited, and even emotional. All those mornings of listening and repeating had finally paid off. That moment gave me the confidence to explore new learning methods. I joined a few online forums where people practiced English together. I wrote comments, answered questions, and even asked for feedback on my writing. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid to share my English with others. Some people corrected me kindly, and others even thanked me for helping them. I realized that I wasn't alone. There are thousands of people around the world learning English, just like me. That sense of community made my journey more meaningful. Reading became a pleasure, not just a task. I started reading children's books in English, then moved to simple novels and news articles. I discovered stories I had never known before, and I learned new words and context. I underlined expressions I liked and used them in my writing and speaking. Every book I finished gave me a new sense of achievement. I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was using it to learn about life, ideas, and people from other cultures. I also started to see how English helped me in everyday situations. I could understand song lyrics, follow instructions in English apps, and even help my friends with translations. One day, I received an email in English and replied without needing help. These small moments showed me that English wasn't just a subject, it was a tool, and I was learning to use it well. I felt like I had a new superpower that opened doors to the world. At this point, I was still far from perfect. I still made mistakes and sometimes forgot words. But something had changed inside me. I trusted myself. I no longer feared English. I respected it. I respected my effort, my time, and my journey. And I knew something very important. I was no longer a beginner. I was a real English learner, walking step by step toward fluency, with confidence, with passion, and with a heart full of determination. Chapter 5, Speaking Without Fear. One of the most important breakthroughs in my journey came when I realized that fluency wasn't about being perfect. It was about being brave. For a long time, I waited until I felt ready to speak English with others, but that moment never came. I always thought I needed more vocabulary or better grammar before I could open my mouth. But one day I told myself, you will never be ready if you don't start now. So I joined a free online speaking club. The first meeting terrified me. My heart was beating fast, my palms were sweaty, and my mind kept going blank. But then I heard someone else speak with an accent and make grammar mistakes, and I thought, if they can try, so can I. The first time I introduced myself in English to the group, my voice trembled. I said something like, "Hello, my name is... I'm from... I learn English." I knew it wasn't perfect, but people smiled and encouraged me. They listened, nodded, and said, "Good job." That small act of kindness gave me the courage to keep going. Week after week, I joined the meetings, shared my ideas, and listened to others. We talked about hobbies, countries, music, and daily routines. Little by little, I became more comfortable. I stopped thinking so much before speaking and started to speak more naturally, even if it wasn't perfect. One of the things I learned during this time was that fluency is not about knowing every word. It's about communicating. Sometimes I didn't know the right word, so I described it using other words. If I forgot the word refrigerator, I said, "the cold box where we put food." People understood me, and that made me feel smart. I stopped being ashamed of my mistakes and started to enjoy the process. Speaking became something fun, not something scary. I looked forward to our weekly meetings and even started practicing with a language partner one-on-one. Another great tool I used to improve my speaking was shadowing. I would choose short videos or podcasts, play them sentence by sentence, and repeat exactly what I heard. Try to match the pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. At first, I couldn't keep up, but after a few weeks, my pronunciation improved, and I sounded more natural. I recorded myself and compared it to the original. Slowly, my confidence grew, and so did my ability to express myself clearly and smoothly. It felt like I was becoming part of the language instead of just studying it. The moment I truly knew I had made progress was when I had a full conversation with a native English speaker without panicking. I spoke about my country, my goals, and how I learned English. The person smiled and said, "Your English is very good. I can understand you perfectly." That compliment stayed in my heart. I didn't feel like a student anymore. I felt like a real communicator. I knew I still had a long way to go, but now I had something stronger than vocabulary or grammar. I had confidence, and that was the real power of learning to speak. When I first decided to improve my English speaking, I was both excited and nervous. I had spent years studying grammar rules and memorizing vocabulary, yet when it came time to speak, I froze. I would try to form sentences in my head, but by the time I was ready to speak, the moment had already passed. It was frustrating because I understood a lot of English when I read or listened, but speaking was a completely different challenge. I realized that knowing English in my mind wasn't enough. I had to find a way to bring that knowledge out through my voice. I started by exposing myself to as much spoken English as possible. I watched movies and series in English, but this time I focused on how people spoke instead of just reading the subtitles. I listened to podcasts where native speakers talked naturally about everyday life. I noticed how their speech flowed, how they used contractions, and how their tone changed with emotion. I began repeating short sentences out loud, trying to match the pronunciation and rhythm. This simple act of mimicking helped me train my mouth and ears to work together in English, and little by little, I started to sound more natural. Although I didn't have many opportunities to speak with others in English at first, I knew I had to find a way to practice daily. So I began talking to myself. I would look in the mirror and describe what I was doing, what I was thinking, or how I felt about my day. It might seem silly, but it worked. I practiced constructing sentences and saying them with confidence. The more I did this, the more comfortable I felt using English in real situations. I learned that fluency doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being consistent. Another thing that helped me was recording myself while I spoke. At first, it was strange hearing my own voice, especially with my accent. But over time, it became a valuable tool. I could listen and notice my mistakes, correct them, and track my progress. I would choose a topic, speak for 1 or 2 minutes, and then listen carefully. This helped me become more aware of how I sounded and what I needed to improve. Over time, my confidence started to grow. Improving my English speaking wasn't about becoming someone else or hiding my accent. It was about building confidence, practicing every day, and accepting that mistakes were part of the journey. I wasn't perfect, but I was better than before. That was the first step. I had started my journey not with a teacher or a class, but with determination, my voice, and the belief that I could speak English clearly if I didn't give up. Chapter 2: Practice with Real People. After gaining more confidence by speaking to myself, I realized that the next big challenge was talking with real people. It was easy to talk when no one was listening, but having a real conversation was different. I felt nervous, afraid of making mistakes or not being understood. However, I knew that if I truly wanted to improve, I had to face that fear. So I looked for people who could help me practice. I joined online language exchange communities where I could speak with native English speakers who were also learning my language. It was a win-win situation. We both helped each other grow. The first few conversations were awkward. I often repeated myself or searched for words, and sometimes I completely misunderstood what the other person was saying. But the people I practiced with were kind and patient. They didn't laugh at my mistakes. In fact, they encouraged me and corrected me gently. These experiences showed me that speaking was not about being perfect. It was about communication. If I could express my ideas, even with a few errors, that was a success. Every conversation taught me something new and helped me feel more relaxed when speaking English. To make the most of these interactions, I prepared topics in advance. I wrote down phrases I might use or questions I wanted to ask. This helped reduce my anxiety and made the conversation flow more smoothly. Sometimes we talk about daily life, hobbies, or our cultures. I learned how to use everyday expressions and idioms that I had never seen in textbooks. I also picked up on informal language, which made me sound more natural. It was during these talks that I realized how alive and dynamic English really is. Another great benefit of practicing with real people was learning to listen and respond quickly. In real-time conversations, there's no time to translate everything in your head. You have to listen, understand, and answer right away. This was difficult at first, but the more I practiced, the faster my brain got at processing English. I started thinking in English instead of translating from my native language. That was a big milestone for me, and it changed how I approach speaking. By practicing with real people, I discovered the true purpose of learning a language: connection. Speaking English became more than just a goal. It became a way to meet people from around the world, to share stories, and understand different perspectives. I still made mistakes, but I stopped letting them control me. The fear faded, and in its place grew a sense of freedom. I was finally speaking English with real people, and it felt amazing. Chapter 3: Building Vocabulary Naturally. One of the biggest problems I had when speaking English was forgetting words. I would be in the middle of a sentence and suddenly forget the name of a simple object or action. It was frustrating and embarrassing, especially when I knew I had studied those words before. That's when I realized that learning vocabulary through lists and memorization wasn't enough. I needed to learn new words in a more natural and meaningful way, through context, repetition, and real-life use. I began reading short articles, watching videos with subtitles, and listening to stories in English whenever I heard or saw a new word. I didn't just write it down. I looked at how it was used in the sentence, what words came before and after it, and what tone the speaker used. I wrote down full sentences, not just a word, so I could understand its meaning clearly. Then I tried to create my own sentences using that new word. This helped me remember the vocabulary better and use it correctly when I spoke. To reinforce what I was learning, I kept a daily journal in English. Each day, I wrote a short paragraph about what I had done, how I felt, or what I had learned. I made sure to use the new vocabulary I had picked up during the day. Writing helped me organize my thoughts and express them more clearly. Later, I would read my entries aloud to practice pronunciation and fluency. It became a habit, and over time, I saw my vocabulary grow and my confidence rise. I also started using flashcards, but in a smarter way. Instead of just writing the word and its translation, I included an example sentence, and sometimes even a drawing or photo to make it more memorable. I used spaced repetition software to review the cards at the right intervals, so I wouldn't forget what I had learned. This technique made a big difference. The words stayed in my long-term memory, and I was finally able to use them when I spoke without hesitating. Expanding my vocabulary naturally changed everything. I no longer struggled to find the right words in conversation. Instead, I began to express myself more clearly and creatively. I understood jokes, metaphors, and even slang. Learning vocabulary became exciting because I was no longer doing it just to pass a test. I was doing it to communicate better. Speaking English felt less like a task and more like a real part of my life. Chapter 4: Improving Pronunciation and Accent. As I got more comfortable with speaking and vocabulary, I started paying more attention to my pronunciation and accent. I realized that even when I used the right words, people sometimes didn't understand me because of how I pronounce them. This made me feel discouraged at first, but instead of giving up, I decided to work on it. I knew I didn't need to sound like a native speaker. I just needed to be clear and easy to understand. I began practicing by listening and repeating. I chose short videos or dialogues and repeated each sentence out loud, trying to match the speaker's tone, rhythm, and pronunciation. I noticed that English has many silent letters and sounds that blend together. For example, the word comfortable isn't pronounced the way it's written, and contractions like gonna or wanna are used in everyday speech. By repeating them over and over, I began to train my mouth to produce those sounds more naturally. Another helpful technique was learning phonics and the International Phonetic Alphabet, IPA. It helped me understand how sounds are formed and where my tongue and lips should be. I practiced specific sounds that were hard for me, like teach R and V. I also paid attention to stress and intonation, how the pitch goes up or down in a sentence. These little details made a big difference in how I was understood. I recorded myself reading text and then compared my voice to native speakers to see where I could improve. I also used tongue twisters to train my pronunciation. They were fun and challenging, and they helped me improve my speed and clarity. I would practice phrases like, "She sells seashells by the seashore," or "red lorry, yellow lorry every day." At first, I stumbled a lot, but with practice, my mouth got used to moving in new ways. My speech became smoother, and I began to feel more confident even with difficult words. Improving my pronunciation didn't mean losing my identity or my accent. Instead, it meant becoming more understandable and confident. I learned to embrace my accent as a part of who I am while still aiming for clear communication. Pronunciation practice became a regular part of my routine, and the results were obvious. People understood me better, and I felt proud of how far I had come. My voice in English was becoming stronger, clearer, and more expressive. Chapter 5, Thinking in English. One of the biggest breakthroughs in my English journey was learning to think in English. At the beginning, I always translated from my native language before speaking. This slowed me down, caused confusion, and made my sentences sound unnatural. I knew that if I wanted to speak fluently, I had to stop thinking in my own language and start thinking directly in English. It sounded difficult, but I was ready for challenge. I started small with everyday thoughts and simple phrases like, "I'm hungry, it's cold today," or "I need to buy milk." Saying these things in my head throughout the day helped me build a habit. After some time, I took it further. I began to describe everything I saw around me in English. When I walked down the street, I looked at people, buildings, the sky, and narrated what I saw in my mind. The woman is wearing a red dress. There's a man riding a bike. Or, the clouds look heavy. Maybe it will rain. I was training my brain to create sentences automatically without going through my first language. This made speaking faster and more fluid. It didn't happen overnight, but every day my thinking became more natural in English. Reading and listening also helped me think in English. When I read a book or listened to a podcast, I paid close attention to the way sentences were formed and vocabulary used. Then I tried to use similar phrases in my own thoughts. For example, if I heard someone say, "I'm feeling under the weather," I would remember that and use it later instead of thinking, "I feel sick." I started collecting natural expressions in my mind and using them in my thoughts. This helped me sound more like a native speaker and less like someone who was translating. I also started practicing English thinking games. For example, I would choose a random object and try to describe it for 1 minute without stopping. Or I would ask myself a question like, "What would I do if I won the lottery?" and answer in English in my head. These little games kept my mind active and helped me become more creative with language. They made me realize that I didn't need to wait for a conversation to practice speaking. I could practice anytime, even in silence. Thinking in English changed everything. It made speaking faster, listening easier, and expressing myself more naturally. I no longer needed to search for words or worry about grammar rules while speaking. My mind had begun to process English in real time. That's when I knew I had reached a new level, not just of speaking, but of truly living in the language. It felt like English had become a part of me. Chapter 6: Creating a Daily Speaking Routine. Consistency was a key to everything I had learned so far. Speaking English once a week was enough. I needed to speak every single day, even if just for a few minutes. So I created a daily speaking routine that fit into my life. I made sure to include different types of speaking practice: talking to myself, shadowing native speakers, repeating vocabulary aloud, and even doing short video calls with language partners. I treated it like going to the gym. It didn't matter how tired I was. Practice was part of my day. I started my mornings by saying a few positive sentences in English. Things like, "Today is a new opportunity to learn," or "I will do my best today." These short affirmations helped me start the day with motivation and got my mouth moving in English early. Then, during the day, I try to describe my actions out loud when I was alone. If I was cooking, I would say, "Now I'm chopping the onions," or "The pasta is almost ready." This made English part of my routine and helped me talk more naturally. At night, I set aside 15 to 30 minutes just for speaking practice. I would choose a topic like travel, goals, or news and speak about it while recording myself. Then I'd listen to the recording, take notes, and try again. Sometimes I also watched a short video clip and repeated the dialogue sentence by sentence, trying to match the pronunciation and tone. It became part of my evening ritual, just like brushing my teeth. Over time, I noticed my speech became smoother and more confident. On weekends, I added a special challenge to my routine. I would create a short story in English and tell it aloud as if I were speaking to an audience. This helped me practice storytelling skills, which are important in real conversations. I also joined online English speaking clubs where I could meet other learners and discuss interesting topics. These sessions gave me real interaction and the chance to use everything I had been practicing during the week. The most important thing I learned from my routine was that progress comes from repetition and patience. Even on days when I felt tired or unmotivated, I still showed up and practiced. Speaking English became a part of my identity, not just something I studied, and the more I practiced, the more natural it felt. My daily routine wasn't just helping me improve my English, it was shaping my mindset and building discipline. Chapter 7: Overcoming Fear and Self-Doubt. Even after all the progress I made, there were still moments when fear and self-doubt came back. Sometimes when I spoke with a native speaker or in a group, I would get nervous. My hands would sweat, my mind would go blank, and I'd start questioning everything I said. I worried about sounding foolish or making mistakes. But I realized that fear is a normal part of learning, and the only way to beat it was by facing it again and again until it lost its power. I reminded myself why I started this journey: to connect with people, to grow, and to express myself in a new language. I told myself that perfection wasn't the goal. Communication was. I began to change how I saw mistakes. Instead of being ashamed, I treated them as lessons. Every mistake taught me something. If I said a word wrong, I would laugh, correct it, and move on. I stopped apologizing so much and started celebrating the fact that I was trying, that I was brave enough to speak. To build my confidence, I surrounded myself with positivity. I followed English learning YouTubers who shared their struggles and tips. I joined communities where learners encourage each other. I even wrote down my own progress each week and read it whenever I felt discouraged. Slowly, I built a mindset that said, yes, I can do this. I am improving and I am proud. Confidence didn't come from speaking perfectly. It came from not giving up. I also learned breathing and relaxation techniques to calm myself before speaking. Before conversation, I would take deep breaths, smile, and remind myself that I was prepared. I practiced eye contact in the mirror, worked on my body language, and tried to enjoy the process. The more relaxed I felt, the more natural my English sounded. I discovered that people responded better when I spoke with confidence, even if I made mistakes. Overcoming fear and self-doubt wasn't about eliminating them. It was about rising above them. Every time I spoke English, even when I was scared, I became stronger. I became more open, more expressive, and more connected to the world. Speaking a new language was no longer a dream or a fear. It was a reality I was living. And I knew that with courage and practice, I could go even further. Chapter 8: Using English in Real Life. After all my practice, I realized it was time to start using English in real situations. It was easy to feel confident when I was alone, talking to myself or recording my voice. But speaking with real people, especially native speakers, was a different level. I knew that if I wanted to grow, I had to take the risk. So I looked for opportunities to speak English in real life. I joined language exchange apps, participated in video calls with other learners, and even spoke to tourists in my city. Every conversation was a step forward. I still remember the first time I ordered food in English at an international cafe. I was nervous, but I smiled and tried. Hi, I'd like a chicken sandwich and a cup of coffee, please. The cashier responded kindly, and I felt proud. It wasn't just about grammar or vocabulary. It was about using my English to live. These small moments gave me real confidence. I started looking for more. I volunteered to help at events where English was spoken. I chatted with travelers, and I even wrote comments in English on YouTube and Instagram. Using English in real life helped me see the beauty of communication. I didn't need perfect grammar to connect. I just needed courage, clarity, and kindness. The more I spoke, the more natural it felt. I also noticed how much I learned just by listening during conversations. People used phrases I had never seen in textbooks, and I wrote them down to study later. My English started sounding more alive, more dynamic, because I was learning from real interaction. I also started doing practical things in English, like writing shopping lists, setting my phone and apps to English, and reading news articles aloud. This constant exposure helped reinforce everything I was learning. I no longer saw English as just a subject. I saw it as a living part of my everyday life. When I got used to seeing and using English everywhere, speaking became less scary and more automatic. By stepping into real-life situations, I broke the final wall between study and reality. English stopped being something I practiced and became something I truly lived. That shift made all the difference. It wasn't about being perfect anymore. It was about being present, using what I had, and growing through experience. That's when I started feeling not like a student, but like a speaker. Chapter 9, Measuring Progress Without Fear. One of the most important lessons I learned was how to measure my progress without fear or frustration. In the beginning, I constantly asked myself, am I improving? But I didn't always know how to answer. Some days I felt great, and other days I felt like I was going backward. I realized I needed a better way to track my growth. So I started keeping a journal. Every week, I wrote down new words I had learned, conversations I had, and challenges I had overcome. This helped me see that I was moving forward, even if it didn't always feel that way. I also began recording myself once a month, speaking about the same topic. Then I would compare it to the recording from the previous month. At first, the difference was small, but after a few months, I noticed big improvements. My sentences were smoother, I used better words, and my voice sounded more confident. Listening to my past self gave me proof that I was growing, and it motivated me to keep going, especially on tough days. Another method that helped me was setting small, realistic goals. Instead of saying, I want to be fluent, I said, this week I will learn 5 new phrases. Or, today I will speak for 10 minutes without stopping. These goals were clear, doable, and gave me a sense of success. Achieving them made me feel proud and helped me stay motivated. I celebrated every little win because I knew each one was part of the bigger journey. I also reminded myself that progress is not always visible. Some days you might not speak better, but your brain is still learning, organizing, and preparing. Language learning is like growing a tree. You don't see the roots, but they're growing deep and strong. I trusted the process. I accepted that mistakes and slow days were normal. I focused on consistency, not perfection. That mindset helped me stay positive and avoid burnout. Tracking my progress helped me stay on course. It reminded me of how far I had come and how much I had achieved. I stopped comparing myself to others and started focusing on my own growth. English was no longer a race. It was a personal journey, and every step, no matter how small, was a step in the right direction. Chapter 10, Becoming the Speaker I Always Wanted to Be. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far I've come. From struggling to say simple sentences to having confident conversations, the journey has been long but rewarding. I remember dreaming about being the kind of person who could speak English fluently, someone who could express ideas clearly, understand others, and feel proud of their voice. Today, I'm not perfect, but I've become that person. I've become the speaker I always wanted to be, not because of talent, but because of effort, belief, and practice. Becoming a good speaker isn't about speaking like a native. It's about communicating with clarity and heart. It's about sharing stories, asking questions, and listening with respect. I've learned to enjoy conversations, to be curious, and to laugh at mistakes. English has given me new friends, new opportunities, and a new way to see the world. And all of that started with a simple goal: to speak better. That goal changed my life. I now help others who are beginning their English journey. I tell them, don't wait to feel ready. Start now. Speak to yourself. Speak to others, and speak from the heart. Don't fear mistakes. They are your teachers. Don't compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to yesterday. Celebrate your wins, no matter how small. And most of all, believe in yourself. You don't need perfect grammar to have a voice. You already have something to say. English is more than a language. It's a bridge to the world. It connects people, ideas, and cultures. It allows us to learn, grow, and dream bigger. I am grateful for every hour I spent practicing, every word I repeated, every fear I faced, because all that effort built something powerful: confidence. And with confidence, anything is possible. I now feel ready for whatever comes next. My journey is not over. There is still so much to learn and explore. But I now walk forward with strength. I know that I have the tools to keep improving. I know that with each new day, my voice grows stronger. I am not just learning English. I am living it. And that, for me, is the greatest reward of all.